Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the invisible systems shaping our world. And I want to start by asking you to think about a paradox today.
Right, a pretty major one.
Yeah. What happens when a system meant to reward talent ends up exhausting its winners and locking everyone else out? We are taught, almost from birth, to believe that inequality is a product of rule breaking. We think it comes from corruption, from nepotism, from unfairness.
And that makes sense, right? That's the narrative we all grew up with.
Exactly. But what if, right now, inequality is surviving and thriving, not because the rules are being broken, but because they are being followed too well?
It's a profound paradox. And to understand it, it really requires us to look past the surface of our daily lives and examine the very foundations of how we define success.
Yeah, we have to look at the actual structure.
Right. As we settle in, you might notice the visual backdrop behind me has shifted for this analysis. I want you to imagine a sprawling, interconnected web of golden ladders.
Okay, golden ladders. I'm picturing it.
And some of these ladders are broken, missing rungs entirely, left to rust near the ground. But others stretch endlessly upward, practically disappearing into the clouds.
But they're not exactly safe, are they?
No, not at all. They are incredibly narrow, they are precarious, and they are surrounded by a sheer, terrifying drop. This is the visual reality of the system we're exploring today.
And that system is meritocracy. Today's deep dive is centered on a massive, highly detailed, and genuinely unsettling book, The Meritocracy Trap by Daniel Markovits.
It's a heavy read, but a necessary one.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to perform a comprehensive systems-level analysis of how meritocracy has fundamentally evolved. I mean, it started out as a noble concept, right? A fair sorting mechanism, a way to break down old, stagnant aristocracies based on bloodlines.
Which was a good thing.
A great thing. But we are going to explore how it has transformed into a self-reinforcing structure, a structure that concentrates advantage, intensifies elite competition to an absolute breaking point, and ultimately undermines democratic stability itself.
The crisis in perception here is foundational. We widely understand meritocracy as a mechanism of fairness. It is essentially the civil religion of modern advanced societies.
The civil religion, yeah. That's a great way to put it.
But it increasingly functions as a technology of stratification. We misperceive not just the inequality around us, but the actual physical structure producing it.
Because surface interpretations focus entirely on individual effort.
Precisely. The narrative is always, if you work hard, you succeed. And if you fail, well, you simply didn't work hard enough.
Right.
But a systems analysis reveals a grand interlocking design linking family investment, education, the labor market, and even political resentment into one continuous feedback loop.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to invite you, the listener, to rethink everything you know about hard work and success. Because I know my own initial reaction to this premise was a bit defensive.
Oh, sure. Mine was too.
Right. I immediately thought, wait, isn't hard work a good thing? Don't we want the most talented people performing our surgeries and writing our software?
Of course we do.
But to understand where we are, we have to understand where we came from. Let's look at the historical aristocrat versus the modern meritocrat.
That's the perfect starting point.
If we look back at the historical aristocracy, it was entirely based on status, by birthright. It was about race, breeding, and caste. If you were a lord, you were a lord simply because your great-grandfather was a lord.
And importantly, the historical aristocrat was idle.
Yes, completely idle. Think of the characters in a period drama like Downton Abbey. They lived lavishly by explicitly exploiting other people's labor, usually peasant farmers or indentured servants, and they produced little to nothing themselves.
They possessed no special abilities and certainly no taste for industry. Working was seen as vulgar.
Exactly. The old aristocratic flex was entirely about showing society how little he had to do to survive. Contrast that with the modern meritocrat.
The modern meritocrat is the exact opposite in that regard. They claim their status entirely through talent and effort.
They believe they get ahead fair and square.
Right. Using means that are ostensibly open to anyone. Standardized tests, university admissions, job interviews. And unlike the idle aristocrat, the meritocrat is highly industrious.
Oh, incredibly industrious. They work grueling 80 to 100-hour weeks.
And they claim to pull their weight, insisting that their massive accomplishments contribute fair, immense value to the society they're leading.
Which is exactly where meritocracy's charisma comes from, isn't it?
Yeah.
It disguises its harms because it was invented to be wholesome, just, and benevolent.
It ties private advantage directly to the public interest. The narrative tells us that the CEO making 400 times what the janitor makes is justified because the CEO's unique skills are allegedly generating massive value for the entire economy.
And the origins of the word itself are incredible because we use meritocracy as a badge of honor today. Politicians from every single part of the political spectrum praise it.
They all do, left, right, center.
But that wasn't the original intent of the word at all, was it?
Not at all. Here is a historical fact that completely flips the script. The word meritocracy was actually coined by the British sociologist Michael Young in 1958 in a satirical book called The Rise of the Meritocracy.
Satirical. That's the key word.
Right. Young needed a word to describe rule by the most virtuous or the most intelligent. The natural word for that, aristocracy, from the Greek geristos, meaning excellent, was already taken and had acquired a deeply pejorative sense over centuries of political activism.
So we had to make one up.
Exactly. So Young combined the Latin root merio, meaning to earn, with the Greek suffix kratos, meaning power or rule, and coined meritocracy. But he meant it as a dark dystopian critique.
He didn't mean it as an instruction manual.
No. In his book, he presented meritocracy as a cousin to aristocracy, not its opposite. It was a warning about a new social order that would replace an old, ridiculous hierarchy based on birth with a new, ruthless hierarchy based on intelligence and effort.
And in Young's fictional timeline, doesn't this hyper-competitive meritocratic system become so oppressive to the working class that it triggers a violent populist revolution?
Yes, in the year 2034.
That is wild to think about. He wrote it as a dystopian warning, and society read it and said, yes, let's build exactly that.
It's incredible how the meaning completely inverted.
It makes me think of Thomas Jefferson's dream of a natural aristocracy. Jefferson wrote about wanting an aristocracy based on virtue and talent rather than wealth and birth. It was this beautiful democratic ideal at the time of the American founding.
It was. But Markovits argues this ideal has been slowly weaponized over the last half-century.
And you can vividly see this weaponization in the rituals of legitimacy we still practice today. Think about university commencements. If you've ever attended one or watched one online at a place like Yale Law School or Harvard, it is a highly orchestrated pageant.
It really is a pageant.
You have professors walking in wearing medieval robes made of heavy wool, silk, and velvet. University officers are wearing jeweled collars and carrying literal ceremonial maces like they are marching into a medieval parliament.
It's very theatrical.
Very. You have famous, incredibly powerful speakers, people like Bill Clinton or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, standing up there urging 22-year-old graduates to follow their passions and serve the world.
And those rituals are not casual, and they are not just for taking nice photographs for the parents. They serve a profound psychological and systemic purpose.
They connect a timeless past to an inevitable future.
Precisely. By repurposing all that old aristocratic medieval pageantry, the robes, the Latin chants, the maces, they invest the new meritocracy with the inherited allure of the old hierarchies.
It's designed to make the new hierarchy feel natural, moral, and inevitable to you, the observer.
When you watch that ceremony, you aren't just watching students get a piece of paper. You are watching the anointing of the new ruling class. It absorbs the strains of transition and entrenches meritocracy into the master narrative of modern life.
It makes alternative ways of awarding advantage, like birthright or even a lottery system, seem absurd or corrupt.
Because the ritual essentially says, these people belong at the top because they earned it, and history itself validates their position.
So meritocracy has successfully branded itself as the ultimate fair system. It has the robes, it has the rhetoric, and it has the standardized tests to prove it. But let's look at what this system actually does to the vast majority of people who are not wearing those velvet robes.
The people locked outside the gates.
Right. Let's look at the squeeze on the rest and the illusion of the open ladder. Because when you zoom out, the sheer scale of the shift over the last 50 years is staggering.
It's a complete structural transformation.
The middle class has essentially been expelled from the charismatic center of economic and social life. They've been banished to the margins.
Yeah.
But I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Is the middle class really doing that badly? Or are we just nostalgic for a past that wasn't that great to begin with?
It is not just nostalgia. The data from Markovits' text on this is striking, sobering, and undeniable.
Let's hear the numbers.
If you look at the generation born in 1940, coming of age during the post-war economic boom, they overwhelmingly out-earned their parents. Absolute economic mobility was a statistical reality. It wasn't just a dream, it was the baseline expectation.
You just assumed you'd do better than your folks.
Exactly. But for the generation born in 1980, the odds that a child will out-earn their parents have fallen by more than half.
More than half. Wow.
And what is most devastating is where that decline is located. It is concentrated precisely in the broad middle class, those between the 20th and 95th percentiles of the income distribution.
The very people whose opportunities were supposed to be most expanded by open democratic education and the destruction of the old aristocracy.
Instead, they're the ones stalling out.
To make this real, the source paints a literal tale of two cities. It completely grounds these massive macroeconomic trends. On one hand, you have St. Clair Shores, Michigan.
A classic Midwestern town.
Yeah. This is a town that was essentially built by and for the middle class during the golden age of American manufacturing. But today, it has been hollowed out. The population peaked in 1970, and the town has lost nearly a third of its residents since then.
And the infrastructure of upward mobility is literally decaying there.
Exactly. The text uses a heartbreaking detail about the local public library. The library, which is usually the central hub of a town's cultural and educational life, relies heavily on part-time staff and is literally still using reading tables bought in 1971.
Frozen in time.
It's a community frozen in a fragile, stagnating amber.
And then you contrast St. Clair Shores with Palo Alto, California, the beating heart of Silicon Valley. Palo Alto is booming to an almost incomprehensible degree.
It's a different universe.
4/5 of adults there hold a bachelor's degree. Over half hold graduate or professional degrees. The median family income in Palo Alto nearly triples the national median.
Triples it.
And when it comes to the infrastructure of mobility, Palo Alto spends nearly twice as much per student on public education as St. Clair Shores does.
They are producing highly specialized, top-tier knowledge workers who go on to dominate the global economy.
What we are seeing is that the stable middle-class jobs that once sustained St. Clair Shores have been systematically replaced. They have been replaced by a tiny number of highly lucrative, glossy jobs in places like Palo Alto, and a massive, sprawling underclass of gloomy, low-wage, precarious service jobs everywhere else.
And here's where the impact goes from purely economic to deeply psychological.
Yeah.
Because there is a profound moral insult built into this meritocratic system. It doesn't just take away your money. It takes away your dignity.
That is the most insidious part of the trap. What's fascinating here is how the ideology of meritocracy fundamentally changes the experience of losing.
That's so.
Under the old aristocratic system, inequality was blatantly, obviously unjust. If you were poor because you weren't born a lord. You were a peasant because your parents were peasants.
You might be hungry, but you still had the moral high ground. You knew the system was rigged.
Exactly. But meritocracy changes the psychological landscape entirely. Meritocracy claims that inequality is earned. It claims that the system is completely fair, that the standardized tests are objective, that university admissions are blind to breeding and open only to talent.
Right. So if you lose out, if you are stuck in a stagnating town like St. Clair Shores, working a gig economy job with no benefits, the system explicitly tells you it is your own fault.
The cultural narrative whispers or sometimes shouts, you didn't work hard enough, you didn't study enough, you weren't smart enough.
The middle class is suffering not just material deprivation, but a profound symbolic downgrade. It's a moral insult. The system sets up hoops that are almost impossible for a middle-class kid to jump through and then blames them when they inevitably trip.
It frustrates the efforts to satisfy the very standards it announces, ensuring most people won't measure up, and then points the finger directly at them.
Which brings us to exactly how that systemic exclusion operates in the shadows. This is what we see in Section 3, the meritocratic inheritance. Meritocracy claims to be an open competition, a level playing field.
But it has actually engineered a new, incredibly effective and highly disguised way to transmit privilege across generations. It's all about engineering the elite child.
This was the massive aha moment from the text for me. And honestly, I had to read this section twice because the numbers felt completely surreal. The source calculates the excess money and time that a typical rich family invests in a child's human capital.
And we're talking about a massive scale of investment here.
Huge. Private tutors, elite school tuition, travel sports coaches, SAT test prep, enrichment activities, violin lessons, everything over and above what a normal middle-class family can afford to invest.
All of it adds up.
Markovits calculates that this excess investment equals a traditional trust fund inheritance of about $10 million per child. $10 million. Now, I have to stop and push back on this because how is that even possible? A math tutor doesn't cost $10 million.
It sounds impossible until you break down the compounding nature of the investment. It is not just the hourly rate of a math tutor.
What else goes into that figure?
It is the housing premium paid to live in a neighborhood zone for a top-tier public school, or the $50,000 a year for a private kindergarten. It is the opportunity cost of a highly educated parent stepping back from their own career to become a full-time logistics coordinator for their child's enrichment.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the parents' lost wages as an investment in the child.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it is the elite summer camps that cost thousands of dollars but offer direct networking to Ivy League admissions officers. When you add up all that capital, both financial and human, poured into a child from birth to age 22, and you calculate the lifelong wage premium that child will earn by securing a spot in the elite tier of the economy, it is the economic equivalent of handing them a $10 million check.
That figure fundamentally redefines how we should view modern parenting among the elite.
The elite family is no longer a site of leisure and consumption where parents benignly neglect their children while attending social functions, as aristocrats once did.
The elite family is now a site of literal economic production. Parents act as helicopter managers, relentlessly optimizing their children's schedules.
And the children themselves are treated as accumulators of human capital. They are vessels being filled with skills, credentials, and polish to ensure they don't fall off that precarious golden ladder.
And the gauntlet these kids have to run is absolutely grueling. The text details places like Hunter College High School in New York or elite boarding schools like Phillips Exeter Academy. These kids are facing an unbelievable workload.
It's a full-time job and then some.
We are talking about 3 hours of homework a night in middle school, 5 hours a night in high school. The Centers for Disease Control has literally issued warnings on schoolwork-induced sleep deprivation among teenagers.
These kids aren't experiencing languid play or decadent amusements. They aren't spending their afternoons wandering around the woods or reading comic books.
They're approaching their schooling with a compulsive, white-knuckled fixation on the competition they are in.
Because that is exactly how dynasties are built today. The modern elite does not circumvent meritocracy. They don't need to break the rules.
They don't need to bribe officials, generally speaking, though we've certainly seen high-profile scandals where some try.
True, but the vast majority use the exact rules of meritocracy to aggressively engineer their children's success. By pouring that $10 million worth of human capital into their child, they ensure the child will legitimately win the purely academic competition for a spot at Harvard, Stanford, or Yale.
They don't buy the acceptance letter. They buy the lifetime of training that makes the acceptance letter inevitable. They monopolize the pathways to status.
And what happens if you beat those impossible odds?
Let's say you are one of the very few middle-class or working-class students who miraculously survives this gauntlet. You didn't have the $10 million investment, but through sheer grit and brilliance, you make it into one of these elite institutions. You'd think the university would celebrate you, right?
You would hope so.
But the system has a specific plan for you, too. And it's not about celebrating where you came from.
This is a crucial and often entirely overlooked nuance. Elite institutions today heavily promote racial and gender diversity, and they explicitly tell those students to bring their authentic cultural selves to the campus.
But for class diversity, it's a different story.
Exactly. For the rare middle-class or working-class students who make it in, those who often form support groups on campus called first-generation professionals, the institution's underlying goal is entirely different regarding their class identity.
The goal is to overwrite their middle-class identity entirely.
The business model of elite universities requires them to take these raw, talented students and erase their ordinary middle-class habits, vocabularies, and values.
They're taught how to speak, how to dress, how to network, and what esoteric cultural markers to care about.
It is an intensive assimilation process masquerading as inclusion. The university's job is to strip away their middle-class roots and effectively manufacture them into elites.
It's incredible. The system absorbs the best talent from the middle class and turns them into foot soldiers for the elite.
They become part of the machine.
Okay, so let's follow this trajectory. The elite kids win the $10 million inheritance. They survive the sleep-deprived gauntlet of high school and the intense assimilation of an elite university. What is their grand prize?
That's the tragic irony of it all.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where the paradox fully blooms, because their prize is an unrelenting nightmare of overwork. This brings us to Section 4. the rat race equilibrium.
Exactly. When meritocracy destroyed the old, idle aristocracy, it created the working rich. But in doing so, it created a caste that can only extract value from their massive human capital by mercilessly exploiting themselves.
We have seen a complete bifurcation of the labor market in what the author calls glossy jobs and gloomy jobs.
The gloomy jobs are the middle-class jobs that have been replaced by automation, offshoring, or the gig economy. But the glossy jobs, elite finance, corporate law, management consulting, top-tier tech engineering, offer immense financial rewards.
But those rewards come with a terrifying catch. They demand absolute, unconditional surrender of your time and your physical well-being.
The text shares some visceral, harrowing anecdotes to make this point. We're not just talking about answering a few emails on a Sunday afternoon or working late once a month.
No, there's a story in the book of a junior banker from New York who was told to fly to meet a client. He had a severe sinus infection and told his bosses he shouldn't fly.
And what did they say?
They told him to get on the plane anyway. The pressure in the cabin during the flight caused his eardrum to physically rupture. He went to the client meeting completely deaf in one ear, with blood literally leaking out of his ear canal.
That is horrific.
He sat through the entire meeting, finished the pitch, and only then went to the emergency room.
Or there is the account from a former lawyer who recounts an associate at his Wall Street firm who was working so many consecutive days without sleep that she passed out cold in the middle of a conference room. Paramedics come, they load her onto a stretcher, they wheel her out.
And the rest of the legal team watches her go and then immediately goes back to proofreading documents.
And the dark punchline of that story, that incident actually helped her make partner.
Because passing out from exhaustion conspicuously demonstrated her absolute unwavering commitment to the firm. It's funny in a dark dystopian way, right? You look at these modern tech CEOs or finance bros, they're billionaires, but they're wearing plain gray t-shirts, looking exhausted and bragging on podcasts about waking up at 4 in the morning to take ice baths and work 16-hour days.
They want us to know how miserable their routines are.
Why is that?
Well, we need to understand the sociology behind why they do that. To understand this, we have to look at a guy named Thorstein Veblen. Back in 1899, Veblen coined the idea of conspicuous leisure.
Right, the idea that the rich showed off by not working.
Exactly. He observed that the ultimate flex of the old aristocratic rich was showing society how much they didn't have to work. You wear pristine white clothes to show you don't do manual labor. You learn to play the harp just to prove you have thousands of hours of free time to waste on something economically useless.
Well, modern elite workers have inverted Veblen's concept.
Let's look at the rowing analogy from the source, which brilliantly illustrates this shift. In competitive rowing, the winner of a single scull race, where one person is alone in the boat, typically crosses the finish line and celebrates easily. They sit up, put their hands in the air, maybe smile and wave.
They are demonstrating Veblen's concept of leisure. They are showing the crowd that they won without completely exhausting their full capacity.
But watch the winners of an 8-person boat race. They do the exact opposite. They cross the finish line and immediately collapse over their oars, gasping for air in a display of what we can call conspicuous exhaustion.
Because in an 8-person boat, your individual output is totally hidden from the rest of the crew.
Precisely. The boat is an averaging device. If the boat wins, nobody knows if you pulled your hardest or if you slacked off and let the other 7 people carry you. So to prove to your teammates, to the coach, and to yourself that you pulled your weight, you have to physically manifest extreme exhaustion.
In modern elite jobs, whether you are structuring a complex merger at a law firm or writing code for a massive tech platform, the work is highly complex, collaborative, and incredibly hard to measure directly.
So extreme hours and physical degradation become the only reliable ways to signal your value to the firm. Effortful, industrious work to the point of literal self-abuse, like working with a bleeding ear, becomes the modern badge of honor.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the elite are suffering from a modern, twisted version of Karl Marx's concept of alienated labor.
Traditionally, that concept applied entirely to the working class. The factory worker was alienated from the products of their labor because the factory owner extracted all the surplus value. The worker was just a cog.
But today, the elite own their own means of production. They own their deeply internalized human capital, their $10 million education.
Yet, to get any financial returns on that capital, they must treat themselves as machines. They must mercilessly exploit themselves. The capitalist and the exploited worker are now residing in the exact same body.
And the physical and mental toll of this alienated labor is tragic. We talked about Palo Alto's incredible wealth earlier, but let's look at the human cost of maintaining that wealth.
Hmm.
At Palo Alto's elite public high schools, specifically Pali and Gun High, the pressure to maintain this flawless meritocratic trajectory has resulted in multiple horrifying suicide clusters.
It's a devastating consequence of the pressure.
The 10-year suicide rates at those schools are 4 to 5 times the national average. Teenagers are throwing themselves in front of commuter trains because they got a B- and think their life is over.
The text quotes one student who described the Caltrain warning missile, which they hear sitting in their classrooms every 20 minutes, as like the cannon that goes off in the Hunger Games every time a kid dies.
It is a devastating, heartbreaking reality. And that underlying misery doesn't just vanish when they graduate and get the high-paying job. College students today at elite universities are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression as they were at the turn of the millennium.
And in adulthood, the misery simply changes shape. You have Amazon executives being told by management that when they hit the wall from physical exhaustion, the only acceptable solution is to climb the wall.
You have corporate cultures at top-tier consulting firms where nearly everyone acknowledges they have been seen crying at their desk, and it is considered a normal rite of passage.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and imagine this for a second. Imagine having every material advantage on Earth. You live in a beautiful, multi-million-dollar home. You have degrees from the best universities on the planet. You have more money than you could ever reasonably spend.
But you measure your life purely by your economic productivity. The text quotes a respondent to a Harvard Business School survey. This is an elite, highly successful executive, and this person proudly bragged on the survey. The 10 minutes that I give my kids at night is 1,000,000 times greater than spending that 10 minutes at work.
10 minutes. That is what the meritocratic system reduces profound human connection to, an optimization problem, a quick return on investment calculation before bed.
It traps entire generations inside demeaning fears and inauthentic ambitions. They are wealthy beyond measure, but they are absolutely, fundamentally not well.
So if we step back, we have a system that has created an idled, excluded, and insulted middle class on one side and an exhausted, self-exploiting, miserable elite on the other.
How does a system where everyone is unhappy sustain itself? Why doesn't it just collapse under the weight of its own misery?
That brings us to Section 5, the feedback loop, or what the author calls snowball inequality.
Let's break down how this machine feeds itself.
The machine feeds itself through a very specific structural core. It works like a flywheel, spinning faster and faster. First, the elite graduates use their highly engineered super skills to monopolize the absolute best jobs.
Okay, so they get the glossy jobs.
Right. But once they are inside those glossy jobs, they don't just do the work. They invent entirely new technologies and corporate structures that heavily favor and require those exact specific super skills. Think of complex financial derivatives on Wall Street, or advanced algorithmic platforms in Silicon Valley, or labyrinthine compliance laws.
Right. It's basically like a video game, where the patch notes only buff the top players. They are actively shaping the entire economy in their own image.
Exactly. They build an economy that only they can operate. This makes the glossy jobs even richer and more essential, and simultaneously it renders mid-skilled, middle-class jobs redundant. It makes the gloomy jobs worse.
And what's the final step of that loop?
The elite take those massive escalating incomes from their newly enriched glossy gerbs, and they use them to buy those $10 million educations for their children. This ensures their children develop the super skills required to win the next generation's tournament. The cycle repeats, turning a ratchet that continuously, unavoidably increases economic inequality.
It snowballs inequality.
Yeah.
And it entirely changes the shape of the society we live in. Let's use a visual analogy to make this clear. At mid-century, in the 1950s and 60s, the income ladder was relatively compressed.
It was a gentle slope.
Right. If you were on the 75th percentile of income and you dropped to the 50th, or if you were on the 99th and dropped to the 75th, your life changed, sure. But it didn't change in mutually unrecognizable ways. You might buy a smaller house or take fewer vacations, but you still lived in the same general society. Moving up or down a rung wasn't fatal.
But now, because of this snowball effect, that ladder has been violently pulled apart, especially at the very top. It's no longer a gentle slope, it's a cliff.
The gap between the 90th percentile and the 99th, or the 99th and the 99.9th, is astronomically massive. It is the absolute difference between economic stagnation and skyrocketing aristocratic wealth.
And this visual of the cliff raises a vital point about why the elite feel so trapped. People often ask, if they are so miserable working 100-hour weeks, Why don't they just opt out? Why don't they take a lower paying job, reclaim their leisure, and seek work-life balance?
It's a fair question. Why stay on the treadmill if it's killing you?
They don't opt out because, in this system, if an elite worker decides to step off the gas and reject self-exploitation, they don't just lose a little income, they exit the elite class entirely.
And because elite education costs so much, because that $10 million inheritance must be purchased anew every generation, that choice cascades down to their children.
If a burnt-out lawyer quits to become a baker, they can no longer afford the $50,000 kindergarten or the private tutors. They risk dropping their children off the edge of that economic cliff.
The sheer terror of downward mobility in a winner-take-all society locks them into the system just as firmly and just as ruthlessly as it locks the middle class out. They aren't just greedy, they are terrified.
This intense pressure cooker, where both the winners and the losers are stressed, alienated, and frightened, naturally, inevitably boils over into our politics.
You cannot have this level of economic and psychological strain without it exploding in the public square. This brings us to Section 6, the political crisis and the class warfare and resentment generated by meritocracy.
But before we dive into this next part, we need to be very clear about our approach here.
Absolutely. I want to make something crystal clear to you, the listener. The sources we are analyzing here contain highly politically charged content. They reference real quotes from both left-wing and right-wing political figures.
We are not taking any sides here.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, these politicians, or these quotes. Our sole mission is to impartially report on the systems-level political analysis provided in Markovits' text to show how the invisible structure of meritocracy shapes the very visible behavior of our politics.
Understood, and it is a crucial distinction. From a pure systems perspective, Markovits argues that meritocratic inequality causes a profound moral corruption of the elite class.
How does that moral corruption manifest?
Because meritocrats genuinely deeply believe they earn their status through grueling effort and objective skill, they feel perfectly licensed to view those who don't succeed with open contempt.
In the old days, a noble lord knew he was just lucky to be born a lord, so he might feel a sense of noblesse oblige duty to care for the peasants.
But the modern meritocrat feels no such duty. It makes the elite deeply immodest. They detach from a broader society whose political and social support they no longer feel they need.
And the text provides stark, real-world examples of this elite rhetoric from across the entire political spectrum, showing how pervasive this content really is.
It cites Hillary Clinton during the 2016 campaign, famously referring to half of Donald Trump's supporters as a basket of deplorables.
It points back to Barack Obama in 2008, suggesting that working-class conservatives in hollowed-out towns cling to guns, religion, and prejudice as a reaction to falling behind economically.
It references Paul Ryan, the former Republican Speaker of the House, dividing the country into makers and takers, heavily implying that those not succeeding in the glossy economy are simply draining the system.
And perhaps most shockingly, the text highlights an essay from the Conservative National Review. This essay explicitly stated that struggling white working-class communities are economically negative assets, called them morally indefensible, and concluded with the chilling phrase that they deserve to die.
When you hear those quotes stacked back to back, it raises a profoundly important question. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of someone in the middle class, maybe someone living in St. Clair Shores. The entire economic system explicitly tells you that your stagnation is your own fault, a personal lack of merit.
Meanwhile, the elite culture widely champions identity politics and diversity, which is historically vital for marginalized groups. But it simultaneously uses language that openly scorns your specific community, your habits, your religion, and your struggles.
If the system says you are a failure and the culture says you are a deplorable taker, what language do you have left to express your very real economic grievances?
That is the crux of the political crisis. The source argues that meritocracy specifically denies ordinary people any high-minded language of victimhood. You can't claim the system is rigged by birthright because the elite will just point to their SAT scores and 100-hour work weeks.
So what is the middle class response when all other avenues of grievance are closed off? According to the text, the response is nativism and populism.
Let's break those down systemically.
Nativism acts as an anesthesia for the internalized shame of economic exclusion. When the meritocratic system makes you feel rejected by your own land in favor of a highly educated, globalized elite, asserting a fierce nativist identity deadens that pain.
If you cannot claim status through merit, you claim it through blood, soil, and borders. It is a narcotic for a wounded dignity.
Populism, similarly, is framed by Markovits as a completely natural, even apt reaction to this specific system. Meritocracy weaponizes expertise and institutions to keep the middle class out. It uses advanced degrees, complex licensing, and algorithmic regulations as literal barriers to entry.
Therefore, the middle class naturally learns to deeply mistrust expertise, to hate institutions, and to reject the very concept of the rule of law. They don't see institutions as impartial arbiters of justice. They see them as the specialized weapons of elite class warfare.
So both sides are utterly trapped in a burning building. You have an elite class that is brittle, anxious, overworked, and deeply condescending. And you have a middle class that feels fundamentally insulted, materially deprived, and turns to anti-institutional anger just to feel seen.
It is a bitter, uncomprehending class war generated entirely by the structure of meritocratic inequality. So what does this all mean? We've looked at the trap, we see how it exhausts the winners, excludes the rest, and poisons our politics. How do we find a way out of a system that feels this entrenched?
The conclusion Markovits synthesizes is actually quite hopeful because it fundamentally reframes the solution. For decades, whenever we talked about economic redistribution, we viewed it through the metaphor of Arthur Okun's leaky bucket.
To quickly explain that, Okun was a mid-century economist who argued that redistributing wealth is like carrying water from the rich to the poor in a leaky bucket.
The idea was that to help the poor or middle class, you had to take from the rich, and some overall economic efficiency would inevitably leak out and be lost in the process. It framed society as a zero-sum game of sacrifice. The rich must bleed so the poor can eat.
But a systems analysis of meritocracy shatters the leaky bucket metaphor. Because both the rich and the rest are oppressed by the same system, the rich by alienated overwork and conspicuous exhaustion, the rest by exclusion and moral insult. Dismantling the meritocracy trap is not a sacrifice for the elite. It is a mutual gain.
It's a prison break for everyone.
Exactly. Shrinking the gap between glossy and gloomy jobs, heavily taxing massive incomes to reduce the incentive for 100-hour work weeks, and investing broadly in all public education rather than hoarding it in a few elite institutions. These aren't just handouts.
These systemic changes would allow the middle class to reclaim its dignity and economic center. And crucially, it would free the elite from their own nightmare. It would allow them to see their children as children, not as human capital projects. It's a win-win.
It really is a profound paradigm shift. It completely changes how you view the guy in the suit sprinting through the airport and the guy wiping down the tables in the food court. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to address you directly and leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something to explore on your own that builds on everything we've discussed today.
It's a question of identity, really.
It is. If our entire concept of merit is actually just a sophisticated way to launder inherited privilege and enforce endless self-exploitation, how much of your own identity is based on a rigged scoreboard? Have we allowed the concept of merit to artificially limit our human potential?
Have we been forced to commodify our natural passions, our weird hobbies, and our pure curiosities into marketable skills just to survive a rat race we never asked to enter?
If you didn't have to prove your worth to society through constant, exhausting productivity, who would you actually be? Seen clearly, meritocracy is not merely a story about rewarding talent. It is a system that reproduces hierarchy while teaching society to mistake that hierarchy for justice.
And that is the true crisis in perception.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.